The third thing that the ego teaches us is that I am what other people think of me. I am my reputation. So becoming obsessed with our reviews, what people think of us, other people's opinions, getting the approval of others. We talk about peer group approval needs and so on. I have 8 children that aren't concerned about those things. They were never raised with that kind of a mentality. The whole idea of, trying to please other people was something that they consistently heard from their mother and myself, that this isn't important to us. We're not attached to that. And this kind of an attachment. So the Tao teaches us that what you think of me is none of my business. What the ego teaches us is that what you think of me is the most important thing that I have, and so I'll do whatever it is that I need to do in order to get you to agree with me, to like me, to approve of me, and so on. The fourth thing that the ego teaches us, this false self, is that who I am is separate from everyone else. And so we are raised in this world of the false self, which teaches us that we have to be in competition with everyone else. We have to defeat someone else. Being number one is the most important thing, and you see people doing this all the time at football games and and you'll see it when the Olympics come up, that the gold medal is more important than anything else, and you'll see people weeping and sobbing over this idea that I have to be better than somebody else in order to be fulfilled in my life. The fifth thing that the ego teaches us is that I am separate not only from everybody else, but that I am separate from what's missing in my life. The Tao teaches us that there is no place that God is not. If there is no place that God is not, then God must be in you. And if there is no place that God is not, then God must also be in all that I perceive to be missing from my life. And therefore, in order to become a manifester and to attract into my life what I want, I simply have to realign myself. I have to rejoin. I have to yoga myself to God. And the most egregious error of the ego is a belief system that says that who I am is separate from God, that God is something outside of me. We have not been raised to understand and believe that at our basic core, what Lao Tzu called our original nature, what we are is love. And all we have to do is be that and live that. There was a great Indian poet. His name was Rabindranath Tagore. And he received the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1913 for a collection of poetry called the Gitanjali. And in that poem, that long poem, 90-some verses, one of those verses says this. He's speaking of the ego. He said, I went out alone on my way to my tryst. But who is this me in the dark? I step aside to avoid his presence, but I escape him not. He makes the dust rise from the earth with his swagger. He adds his loud voice to every word I utter. He is my own little self, my Lord. He knows no shame, but I am ashamed to come to thy door in his company. That's a great poet. And that's a great piece of truth. That in order to get to this place, I speak about, that Maslow spoke to me about and trained me to think about, called self-actualization, is that we have to stop evaluating who we are on the basis of those ego identifiers, and instead begin to see ourselves as divine love. as pieces of God. I have now finished 67 verses of the Tao, and I've written 67 essays on when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And this isn't just a clever play on words here. This is a quantum truth. As my friend Deepak Chopra has often said to me, quantum physics is not only stranger than you think it is, it's stranger than you can think. So that if you look at your origination, the place that you came from, this thing that Lao Tzu called the Tao, this great source that is everywhere, there is no place that it is not. And yet it is doing nothing. And yet it leaves nothing undone. If you go out and just go for a walk this afternoon when you get home, just look at the perfection of all that is. Just look at the clouds and look at the sky and look at the ocean and look at the trees and look at the leaves, and even more important, look at the space between the leaves. And look at the invisibleness and the perfection of how everything is. There's a constancy, if you will. And this constancy is always there. And your goal, my goal, in the time that I have with you here today, is to convince you to go to a place within yourself where you can emulate that divine perfection, which requires you to do nothing, which never uses force, which never pushes itself, which recognizes something. I'm going to read to you just one of the verses of the Tao and a little bit of what I wrote about it. And I seldom read to an audience because I don't like being read to myself. But I'm just going to share a little bit of this. Here's what Lao Tzu said in verse 29. Do you think you can take over the universe and improve it? I do not believe it can be done. Everything under heaven is a sacred vessel and cannot be controlled. Trying to control leads to ruin. Trying to grasp, we lose. Allow your life to unfold naturally. Know that it too is a vessel of perfection. Just as you breathe in, breathe out. There is a time for being ahead, a time for being behind, a time for being in motion, a time for being at rest, a time for being vigorous, a time for being exhausted, a time for being safe, a time for being in danger. To the sage, all of life is a movement toward perfection. So what need has he for the excessive, the extravagant, or the extreme? There's a time for everything. Imagine if you knew this. If you really knew that what you were experiencing emotionally in your life was a part of what there is a time for, and that you're not really doing anything. Lao Tzu says it over and over again. You're not doing anything. You're being done. You're being done right now. You're one of the 10,000 things, and it is all being done. And you have a sense that in this physical world that there's nothing for you to do. Just keep this thing that houses your soul in as healthy a space as you can, but basically it's doing what it's doing. And you, inside of there, the infinite you, is just an observer to the whole process. And isn't that one of the things that we learn in our very first yoga days? It's just, don't be so attached to your body and what it can do and how it hurts to try to do that, and can I balance myself here, and can I do a downward up or down or whatever the hell they call all of those things that are out there. I just do Bikram, so it's so there's a sense of this awareness. So because of the time, I mean, I usually take 3 or 4 hours, or sometimes 3 or 4 days to go through this, and I'm trying to do this in a brief amount of time. The reason that most of us cannot reach this exalted state that I want to present to you in the limited time that we have is because we have come to believe in our limitations. We've come to believe in our ordinariness. We've come to believe that who we are is not God, is not divine. All right? So in order to transcend that mentality, you have to sort of reprogram your subconscious mind. Your subconscious mind is the mind that is doing virtually everything that you do. It's the mind that got you here into this room, that put your mat down, that got you dressed this morning, that got your breakfast. When you get in the car, you don't think about, oh, how do I start this thing, and how do I got to make a right turn here. Do I slow down? Do I not? You all programmed your conscious mind, programmed your subconscious mind to do all of these things on automatic. And according to my friend Bruce Lipton, about 96 or 97% of what we do all day long, every day of our lives, 24/7, is done by our subconscious mind. So we have been programmed to believe in our ordinariness. I don't know if you saw my most recent PBS special, but I opened it up with a little story from Portia Nelson, so I'll just share it here with you if you haven't seen it. If you have PBS, you probably have, because that's about all they play. And I'm very proud of that, and we've raised close to $250 million for public television. So, since 1999, it's been amazing. So this was something that Portia Nelson, who I knew, who passed away a few years back, 10 years back now. She lived up in Seattle. And she was at a seminar, and they were asked to write the autobiography of their life in five verses, 5 chapters. So, and they gave them only like cards this size. Actually, they were smaller than this. They were 3 by 5 cards. So write out chapter 1 of your life and just go to where you are today. And I remember doing this very same thing, but what she wrote was so brilliant that I asked her daughter if we could put it on public television, which I did on the most recent show, and we made a contribution to Portia's work. So this is what she wrote down in the chapter 5 of her life. Chapter 1, she said, I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm lost. I'm helpless. It isn't my fault, and it takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2 of my life. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place. It isn't my fault. It still takes a long time for me to get out. Chapter 3 of my life. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it there. I still fall in. It's a habit. But my eyes are open. I know where I am, and it is my own fault, and I get out immediately. Chapter 4 of my life. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5 of my life. Finally, I walk down another street. Isn't that great? So in the time I have left, I want to talk to you about walking down another street. And this other street is a street in which you have an awareness that not only do you have a physical body, but you have come to believe that this physical body is who you are, and that you have locked yourself into these 5 senses and decided that whatever evidence they provide for you is how you identify and define your reality. By what I see, by what I hear, by what I smell, by what my life what looks like, by how much money I have, by the stuff that I possess. And this is the world of the ego. And this is the world of the false self, according to my teacher, Nisargadatta Maharaj in India, who passed away in 1986. The false self is the ego. The ego is the part of us that has come to believe that who I am is defined by these 6 things. Who I am is what I have. And so we spend a big hunk of our life attempting to get as much stuff as we possibly can. The Tao teaches something very different. Let go of everything you have. When I moved to Maui in 2005 full-time, I gave up everything that I owned. Everything. 20,000 books, all of my photographs, records of every description, furniture, all the things in the house, all my clothing, shoes. It was all donated to people who lived on underneath a bypass in Florida. And let go of all of it. So the ego teaches us you are what you have. The Tao teaches us let go of everything that you have. Do less and accomplish more. One of Lao Tzu's most famous observations was, I do nothing and leave nothing undone. My son has taken to becoming a spiritual Taoist. Every time I tell him to do something, he says, I do nothing. And I leave nothing undone. But there's much wisdom in that. I could go on into that. The second thing that the ego teaches us is that who I am is not only what I have, but who I am is what I do, what I accomplish. And so we spend a big hunk of our lives believing that the way that we become, quote, successful, happy, fulfilled, self-actualized, whatever it might be, is on the basis of what I accomplish, what my resume looks like, how many promotions I get. And so we send our children off to school and we ask them to learn to identify themselves on how much they get and what they accomplish. Your grades become more important than what it is that you are studying. What you own, what clothes you wear, what labels you have, and so on. And we become obsessed with this kind of absurdity. And this is the false self at work. There's a time for things not to work out. Imagine if you knew that in the midst of my working with my daughter, for example, when I see the struggle that she's going to, and I can stand back and say, there's a time for her to experience this. And there's a time for her not to experience it. If you read Katie's life, you'll see that there was a time for deep depression. There was a time for fear. There was a time for anger and worry and despair, deep despair. And when you're in those things, if you could step outside of yourself and look at it and say, there's also a time for its opposite. As long as I'm incarnated into a physical world, there's a time for all of it. And as you do, you get to a new place in your life where you begin to look at all the things that are happening to you because you remember verse 40 of the Tao says, it's all about returning. It's all about returning. Returning to what? Returning to the place from which you originated. The first 9 months of your life, you lived inside of your mother's womb in water. And during those whole 9 months, nobody could get in there and mess around with you. Nobody could get in there and get you to worry about anything. You didn't have sonograms that you'd look at and say, my God, I don't have a nose yet. What the hell's going on? I sure hope I get a nose. And you got into nose therapy and you worry about it. Oh, what if it doesn't happen? You don't do that. And all of a sudden, perfectly, it all unfolds in exactly the way it's going to unfold, independent of your opinion about it. You're not doing anything. Nothing is left undone. You're being done. You're being completed. And you were totally, completely at peace with it. You were surrendered to it. You allowed it. It wasn't a struggle. It wasn't. And then you popped out of there. And then you said, thank you, God. Thank you, Tao. Thank you, Source. We'll take over from here. And that was the biggest mistake. All of a sudden, you took over. And you edged God out. E-G-O. You edged God out. And you took on an ego, didn't you? And what is an ego? It's just an idea. Just an idea about who you are. Instead of being a piece of God, a piece of the Source, you decided, and those around you decided, that you were something different. And if you studied quantum physics, and you took the tiny little particle that began you, and you tried to find out where it came from and reduced it down to its tiniest subatomic properties, ultimately you would discover what Lao Tzu knew. That it's the spirit that gives life. That you didn't come from a particle. That particles do not create particles. Particles do not come from particles. Originally, all particles come from an energy. A field of energy that has no beginnings and no ends and no boundaries. And that's who you are. And returning back to that, and letting go of the idea that who you are is what you have, and who you are is who you control. I don't think there's any more all-pervasive theme in the Tao Te Ching than the idea of being a non-interferer. You, Stephen? I mean, isn't it? It's about not interfering, isn't it? It's about letting go. It's about allowing. It's about detaching. It's about disconnecting yourself from this belief that you are in charge of other people. I'm the father of 8 children and the father of motivation. That's what they tell me, so I've got... And as this father of 8 children, one of the things that I've recognized and what has made me, I think, a better parent, particularly even since I've been doing this, is my willingness to, I call it the bite your tongue verse of the Tao. Just hang back just for a second, just as you're about to interfere, just as you're about to lay it on and tell somebody else how they should be and what they should do and how they should do it, you step back and realize that what Khalil Gibran, the great Lebanese poet, in writing in the Prophet, said was just a basic truth. Your children are not your children. They are the products of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not for you. And you step back, and I can't even begin to tell you how freeing it is to realize that you don't have anything to do. You don't have anyone to control. You can be at peace. And I watch, and I've become much more of an observer, even on airplanes. I was in London 5 days ago. And I don't know if you've flown in and out of Heathrow lately, but things have really changed. We couldn't take anything on the plane. The terrorists, whoever they are selling fear, and we respond with more fear. Every time you use force, you create a counterforce. And then another counterforce, and before you know, and the Tao teaches us all. I mean, one of the great lessons in the Tao is that any country that has its primary resources and its energy placed on building weapons is not of the Tao. And those countries that have their consciousness located in the Tao put their energy into tractors and building homes and growing food, not building weapons. I saw a movie not too long ago with Nicolas Cage about warlords or something, the Lords of War, I think it was something like that. One of those alarming things about how much energy we are in the world
creating energy to destroy ourselves. That we have literally created from our consciousness enough weaponry on this planet to eliminate all life within just a few moments. It's all there. It's all there for us. We've allowed ourselves to move so far away from the great teachings of the great spiritual masters. And we believe that we're a Christian nation or that we're a spiritual nation when we find ourselves having moved away from these simple principles and then getting upset with other people because we can have these kind of weapons, but they can't. And we don't look hard enough at ourselves and all the ways that we have deflected ourselves from the greatest teachings of all of the great spiritual masters.